Thanks a lot, Victoria, and thanks to the Media Reform Coalition for holding this series of events. What I want to talk about is the media coverage of Britain's role in the world, Britain's foreign policy. And I'm going to base most of what I'm saying on the three studies that we've done at Declassified UK over the last few months that are all available on the Declassified website, which are kind of statistical research on how the media covers British foreign policy. And all my points are mainly about military policies, foreign policies generally, security and intelligence issues. I think, first of all, it's important to sort of set the context and to clarify that the corporate media are not principally news organizations. I mean, they are primarily profit-seeking corporations with political agendas. And so we shouldn't actually expect the corporate media to tell us the news, and sure enough, they don't. The two key things really about the way that the establishment media operate is what they don't report, and then how they sanitize what they do report. The key issue, what I think the biggest issue, is what they don't tell us. So there's almost nothing in the establishment media on some of the UK's key relationships, for example, with human rights abusers like Egypt or Israel or Oman. I mean, there's literally almost nothing anywhere across the entire mainstream media. The media cannot mention that the war in Yemen is partly a British war, despite all of the evidence of the RAF's BAE Systems role in the war. It can't mention that British ministers are complicit in war crimes in Yemen. It can't mention the truth about the massive extent of UK support for Saudi Arabia. It can't mention that the UK is a serial abuser of human rights around the world when you look at its allies. It can't mention that the UK is a warmongering state, a rogue state that routinely abuses human rights. And it can't mention the systematic role that the royal family plays in cementing Whitehall's support for its favorite dictators and torturers. All these things are off the radar. Not a single one of our Declassified's revelations since we started in 2019 has been covered in the corporate media, and we never expected them to. The establishment media, as a general rule, does not cover important stories on the UK's role in the world. There are some exceptions, but really not many. So we can't expect the establishment media to reveal what the UK oligarchy does, because actually they're part of it. The corporate media prefer fairy tales about how the UK promotes peace, democracy, and human rights all over the world. And just occasionally they might make mistakes or violate those grand principles in a sort of in a unique or unusual way. Specifically on the issue of media collusion with the state, I just wanted to raise a couple of points because this is routine. The first key thing is the agenda setting role of the media. The media largely follows the state in covering certain issues rather than others. So, for example, Russia, China, Iran, Syria, they're the official enemies, and they're the countries who are largely held to account by the British press, not the UK itself. So the official enemies received endless coverage, particularly about their human rights abuses and the way in they repress their populations. Practically anything can be said about the official enemies, however outlandish. But on our allies, the media routinely buries that evidence or downplays their crimes and downplays the role that the UK plays in those crimes. The second key point, I think, about media state collusion is that it's important to realize that most media coverage of the UK's military and foreign policies actually derives from the Ministry of Defence and the Foreign Office itself. Government press releases are regularly reproduced in the corporate media as news pieces. And that happens routinely, practically daily. Numerous other pieces are based on Whitehall sources, anonymous sources. So the corporate media constantly acts as a platform to amplify the views of the state. And in those articles, there are routinely no or few critical or challenging comments or qualifications to what ministers or officials claim. So they end up just parroting what the state wants to be published. And much of the time, defense and foreign policy journalists don't even pretend to be doing anything else. I mean, they don't even pretend to be journalists. They're actually happy acting as simple conduits of information coming from the state, and they see their role as actually amplifying the role of the state. And what this means is that, to a large extent, the MOD and the Foreign Office, but especially the Ministry of Defence, in effect, control a large amount of what is published in the media about UK military and foreign security policies. And that is a massive issue, which I think most people are not aware of, where this information in most, I would say, articles actually comes from. This is completely not a conspiracy. I mean, it's journalists willingly participating in a system where they want to increase their access to government and are quite happy playing their role as useful idiots. Now, that's not to say that there aren't occasionally articles that appear in the mainstream press, mainstream media, that reveal or criticize certain aspects of British foreign policy. Ultimately, the system is not monolithic, and it is possible to occasionally get independently minded critical stories covered. But the first thing to say about that is that those critical articles are actually very rare, considering the extent of what Britain is actually doing in the world. The number of critical articles is very rare, and they're usually sanitized in language more acceptable to those in power and don't tell the full story. When articles on very sensitive subjects appear, like, for example, UK involvement in war crimes or illegal or covert policies, those articles are usually quickly forgotten and not repeated in subsequent media coverage on the same issue. As I said, the keeping of the public in the dark is certainly not a conspiracy. It's worse than that. There are no formal curbs on individual journalists telling the truth. It's groupthink. No one is telling journalists formally not to write certain things. Journalists largely think the same and prioritize their careers over telling the truth. There's constant self-censorship, and journalists know that they destroy their careers if they consistently told the truth. So they play happily a game. The corporate media we have serves our governance system, which is more oligarchy than democracy. That's also something, of course, that corporate media cannot admit, that we have a deeply elitist, secretive, authoritarian form of governance that really does not work in the national public interest at all. The journalists push the illusion of Britain being a full democracy at home, just like they push the illusion that Britain is concerned with promoting democracy abroad. I think, just in conclusion, I mean, what do we do about this? I think that our task is basically to dump the corporate media entirely. They cannot be reformed, since as private corporations with profit-seeking agendas and very clear political agendas, their structures will always serve the establishment. The BBC might be able to be reformed to a certain degree, yes, but never to the point, in my view, that it will ever become a true public service under the current political governance system that we have, which is a deeply elitist and secretive one that resembles more oligarchy than democracy. The people need to be encouraged to do two things, in my view. One is to support and fund independent media, so we have a more pluralist information system. So we have people accessing information from way beyond the mainstream. And the second thing is to challenge corporate media more and expose them for what they are, part of the UK's ideological system that does keep the public in the dark about what's being done in their name, that is far too close to the governance structures that are ruling in our country. I'd like to appeal to individual progressive writers. I'd like to appeal to independent media to do more to challenge the way that the establishment media operates, and to raise awareness among larger numbers of people in the country of the pernicious role that the traditional media actually plays in keeping the public in the dark and even brainwashing people to a very large extent. So my view is we shouldn't so much complain about how the establishment media operates, because the corporate media is not meant to tell the truth, is not meant to tell the news. What we should be doing is exposing how it works to larger and larger numbers of people. Well, it's true that the BBC World Service does cover a larger range of issues than the sort of the domestic service, but the BBC World Service is still propaganda when it comes to covering the UK's role in the world. It still just simply does not approach coverage in an objective and independent way. You know, again, like the rest of the BBC, it spends far more time talking about Britain's enemies and revealing what they're up to than Britain itself. I do actually accept there's a bit more leeway for the World Service to cover things a little bit more independently than the domestic service. I think the reason for that is that ultimately, where the power lies is in the UK. So the BBC needs to be. There's more risks, if you like, telling the British public the truth than there is the world public, and I think that's one of the issues that perhaps lies behind the coverage. But the World Service, you know, is not some paragon of independent reporting. I've listened to it for a very long time as well. It has lots of interesting programs, but again, the blind spot for the BBC, for all parts of the BBC, is coverage of our own country and our own country's role in the world. That's the real problem.
Right.
I don't like this term fascist. I think it's an overused word. Britain is not going to become a fascist state. You know, I don't think we're in that realm. But the realm we're already in is one where there is a large degree of authoritarianism and certainly extreme secrecy. And there is a very worrying sign of an increasing clampdown on journalism. You know, we know that the Official Secrets Act is meant to be reformed, and the government has put forward legislation to try and reform the Official Secrets Act, to tighten it up even further, to make it a criminal offence to release certain kinds of information to the public. That's a really worrying development in itself, another clampdown on media freedom. I mean, you know, we also always have to remember that sitting in a high security maximum high security prison in East London is Julian Assange, who's been vilified and prosecuted by not only the US authorities, but by the British authorities for the crime of revealing the crimes of states. That is an extremely worrying precedent that we at Declassified have done a lot of work on, as have others. And that's an exceptionally worrying thing for all of us. And I mean, our own experience of being blacklisted at Declassified, blacklisted by the Ministry of Defence and blacklisted by GCHQ with their failure to release key information to us and to try and stop collaborating with us because we're doing critical journalism rather than the compliant journalism that most media outlets do. That's also a worrying sign. You know, and all this is taking place while the government is engaged in this global campaign for media freedom. I mean, it's nonsense. Actually, it's propaganda. At the same time as clamping down on journalism in the UK, the government is playing up its support for media freedom. I think students of propaganda will well understand why the government is doing that.